morning, everyone. As we are recording today, we're asking you to put your cell phones on a vibrate or silent mode. And if you do need to take a call while we're recording, would you please step into the hallway? Secondly, because we are recording, we would like you to come to the podium, and questions then will be picked up onto the tape. We can hear them in the room, but this is being taped for rebroadcast on cable access. So we want you to come here to the podium, and we have a little reminder up here to please state your name prior to asking your question. The chamber does not have prepared questions today, so we're asking for the audience to just continue to step up and ask your questions. We are scheduled from 9 to 10:30. If we take all of that time, that's great. If we run out of questions, we'll stop a little earlier. Any questions before we get started? Okay. And again, we'll start with opening statements.
Sure.
You good to go, Chris? Is my microphone on?
No.
Is my microphone on?
Yes.
All right.
Is mine on? Yes.
Mr. Kresha, is your microphone on?
I believe so.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the Little Falls Area Chamber of Commerce Legislative Update. This is the post-2016 legislative session. My name is Deborah Bowles. I'm the President CEO of the Little Falls Area Chamber of Commerce. We cover all of Morrison County. Our guests today are Representative Ron Kresha and Senator Paul Gazelka. We will start with opening statements about how they feel the session went and some of the bills that perhaps they authored and were able to get through the system. And we'll start with Representative Kresha this time.
Very good. Thank you, Deb, and thanks everyone for being here. So I know that right now what you have in front of you is the news is putting out the transportation bonding and the tax bill and everything that's happening with the governor's veto. And that's going to be the current situation. That's going to be the excitement, but I will tell you there's a lot more going on than that. And I'll just run through some of the things that I was very proud to accomplish over the last 2 years. Starting with being the vice chair of the Education Finance, we did $525 million in education funding, which was a 2% increase for both years. That was a substantial increase. I was very happy to be a big part of the policy that was written in there as well as the funding. I was the lead on $35 million in broadband funding for this year, $10 million for last year. That was a total of 45. And my initial number that I believe we needed out of the gate for the 2015-2016 session was $50 million. So I was pretty much right on with that. I was also the lead negotiator with all the policy, and I think we did a really good job with that. We have a very good grant project. And with that as well, we have Connect America funds coming in from the federal. So we're actually going to see historic levels of broadband investment in Minnesota for rural broadband, something that I've been actually involved with for 20 years. As I look out there and I see Jerry, I mean, we were terminating fiber 20 years ago, and here I am at the legislative level taking all that knowledge and much of which came from us working together right into bills and policies. So I was the lead on Child Protection Task Force. When you look down at all the things that are happening in the child protection on the House side, that was a lot of the work that I was doing. We put $52 million into the last budget cycle into social services, increased social workers out into the state of Minnesota for many of these kids. And if you ever wonder about some of the underbelly of our society and things that we need to really be looking hard at, look at the fact that last year we had 72,000 reports for children that were abused, neglected, or maltreated. 72,000. These are unsolicited reports. These are reports that are coming in where somebody has seen something with a child that just simply isn't right. Most of those reports are children under 2 years old. Just take a second to digest that. A kid that's under 2 years old is being mistreated by somebody that's supposed to be a relative or a family member. So it's something that's probably one of the hardest things that I deal with, but one of the most rewarding. Along the lines of that, I was able to push for $15 million in increased foster care reimbursement that the governor did sign in the supplemental budget bill. It's not enough, but it's a start. And as we continue on this path, one of the things that we know is if we're going to have this many reports, and if we're going to have this many children that are in difficult situations, we need to find loving foster care parents. And that's just a very difficult situation for our state right now. You're going to hear, I'm sure, from some of the people that don't always approve of the things that I do, that I didn't get anything done and it was a do-nothing legislature. Let me offer this up for you as you hear that statement. I had 5 bills. I have 5 letters on my desk signed by the governor. 5 bills. Of those bills that passed, they all passed unanimously except for one, which unfortunately had 8 people that voted against it. I had unanimous support of all 5 of my bills. The telecom reform bill that I passed 122 to 8. The bills that I passed did telecom reform, fetal alcohol syndrome, child protection, and along with Senator Gazelka, we passed the Sentinel landscape in Camp Ripley. So in a lot of ways, I had a really good session with things that I was able to work on that I don't think get a lot of attention, but certainly have made a direct impact. Along with that, in the tax bill, I worked on the Angel Tax Credit that became the Angel Tax Grant, and that is investing for small businesses and helping small businesses get capital in our rural areas of the state as we try to get them to grow and invest. You're going to hear a common theme with me. This is something that I've been working on for the last 20 years, and that is growing rural Minnesota. We need to have more jobs out here, we need to have more companies, and we need to support the entrepreneurs. Because we're not going to get silos, we're not going to get smokestacks, there is no more big companies moving out here, but it's these small 10 to 15 employers that will start up from somebody's basement or someone's garage, and they'll hire 10 or 15 of their friends, and the next thing you know, they're a major employer for a community. So I've been supporting those entrepreneurs, I've been trying to get them wired, and I've been trying to get them the tax breaks, because that's what's going to help grow Main Street, Little Falls, and Long Prairie, and Royalton, and Pierce. And the last thing is, the last couple things, preschool scholarships. I've been leading on that. Again, it's for the disadvantaged kids. Named to the governor's National Committee for Child Protection. The governor reached out to me, and I will be the House member that goes to DC and will be leading on the national conversation of how we can come back with improvements for child protection in the state of Minnesota. I'm sure there will be a lot of other things that we'll talk about, but that's the things that I was able to get done in the last 2 years.
Great. Thank you, Representative Kresha. And now we'll hear from Senator Gazelka.
Well, good morning, and I will say that working with Representative Kresha has been a real joy. Ron is a real servant, and gives his whole heart and mind and soul to what he does down there. Am I on now? I asked you guys if I was on. So all that's off the record now, Ron.
That's okay.
But anyways, it's just a real joy to work with Ron down there. Some of my main focus was on the tax conference committee. That actually didn't get through last year, so we just continued working as a conference committee this year. That was 10 legislators, 5 senators, 5 House members, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats. So it was a mix of rural and metro, and we actually worked very, very hard to pass a very, very good tax relief bill. 87% of the legislators voted for it, so it had huge bipartisan support. It gave tax relief to the ag community, it gave tax relief to the small business owner, it gave tax relief to veterans, it expanded work and family credit for those that are disadvantaged, it provided increase in local government aid and county program aid. It was a compromise bill that did a lot of good, particularly for rural Minnesota. And we were very surprised that yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, the governor vetoed that bill. We often have glitches in bills, and we fix them, and we sign memorandums that say we'll address them at the beginning of the next session. That happens all the time, and the governor said that was the reason why he vetoed it. So I can't be in his mind. I don't know exactly why we can't override that veto because session is over. But I will tell you that was very, very frustrating. In addition to that, we also passed a military pension exemption because it was put into the spending bill that the governor did sign. So something that people have been working on for, I think, 20 years. I've been the chief author of that bill for a number of years. that allowed our veterans that have worked 20 years or longer in the military for their pensions to be exempt. And so I was very pleased that that was accomplished. That's been a long time in coming. I can tell you that we're one of only about 5 states that didn't exempt their pensions, so some of our more successful veterans have been going to other states to start their second career. Ron was helpful in that one as well. So that was a huge accomplishment that actually did happen. I will tell you that in the last 2 years, so it was last year that we increased the funding for our nursing homes in rural Minnesota. That was a huge thing for our rural nursing homes. They had to get more resources, and we were able to do that. There's a number of other things that we've done that did get accomplished. There was an emphasis on rural Minnesota. The education funding for rural Minnesota, there's been a number of directions and ways that we've been helping to increase funding and dollars for our rural schools. And so we'll continue to work on that. I'm asking some of the big players, like Education Minnesota, to start thinking about how we make that more equalized, because it's not. The bonding bill was another area that I thought we had bipartisan support until the very end, like the last 15 minutes. The bill was almost $1 billion plus another $300 million of cash, of which $700 million went towards roads and bridges everywhere, metro, rural, but in the end it got derailed. Light rail was what derailed it. There was a number of senators, I think about 7 from the metro, that said we're not going to have a bonding bill unless you give us light rail. And I'll make the case for that is not the way we should be spending our money. We should fund transit, but buses are far less expensive and can pick up people far closer to their houses than light rail does. And so that's why many Republicans are saying that is not good use of our dollars. Let's put our transit dollars into buses. And so if the governor had signed the tax bill, I would have said we deserved a B. But now it drops because he vetoed it. I would say all of us are in that, and it's just unacceptable that we did not give any tax relief after having a $2 billion surplus last year that was on the heels of a $2 billion tax increase that the Democrats voted into law. And so for us not to give any relief is unacceptable, but we're going to keep working at it. My hope is that there will be a special session that does a bonding bill with significant dollars towards roads and bridges, and I hope there's a tax relief bill similar or exact to what we just passed.
Deb, I just need to add to that. Senator Gazelka was very modest in his talking about military pension. Let me tell you how that came into play. Senator Gazelka has a very good relationship with the Senate Democrats on the tax, and it was on the tax conference committee. And when that came together, being in the exec board, I get a chance to see how everything's flowing in. Senator Gazelka introduced that amendment and got that in the conference committee. So while I appreciate your modesty, it also needs to be said that that was really his doings and his pushing that came through the Senate side. We were trying on the House side, but it was just, it speaks to the nature of how we work together down there. So I was very, very pleased to see that come through.
Thank you. We did have 2 submitted questions from people who could not be here today. And one of them is kind of that post-analysis of how the session went, but it ties into the compensation that our legislators receive. Could you please address how your compensation, especially for outstate legislators who have to travel into the metro area and live there during session, how are you compensated for your costs that you incur?
So I'll take the Senate side first because they're slightly different, but the salary is $31,000, and then they pay a per diem or each day that you're actually in session. I think it's $85. I could be wrong on that. I don't really pay attention to that, but every day you're in session, they pay a per diem amount. And then in the Senate, they pay all year round housing. So you have an apartment that they pay $1,500 a month for rent plus utilities that you keep all year. The house, I believe, is not all year round, so they have to move every year. So I've been in the same apartment for 4 years, which means I don't have to keep moving things back and forth. If you go look out at my pickup out in the parking lot there, it's full of stuff because I'm still moving back because you have to balance your family life. My wife and daughter moved down with me. She goes to school half a year at Pillager High School and half a year at Maranatha Christian Academy. And so the Senate has decided that they want to give yearly housing so that they don't have to, senators don't have to keep moving everything back and forth. And then in the Senate, they pay us mileage anytime that we have to go out, when it's a non-election year, and visit people. They ask me to come to, say, Swanville to talk about charitable gaming, and I go to the Lions Club out there, or wherever it is, they pay us mileage for some of those extra trips that we make. And those are the things that add up how a senator gets paid.
Very similar in the House, and we get $31,000, we get $66 per day for per diem when we're down there. I'll just add this, and what we get paid is all public. You can go look at that. I didn't get into this to make a lot of money. I didn't do this for the money at all. In fact, when I signed up, I didn't even know what the payment was. And I get a lot of people who come up and say, oh, you're overpaid. That's fine. I'll just offer this. I leave usually Sunday night. I return Friday night. I've missed more plays for my kids in the last 5 months, from January to May. I can't go anywhere without having an hour conversation about what we're doing, which is great, because that's what I love to do. But I will tell you, if you look at the numbers and you ask my family how fair it is, you'll probably get a much different response.
Thank you. And the second part of the question that came up was, what would be the financial impact if a special session was called at this point in time?
Well, very little, because most of the work is all done ahead of time. We meet for one day, go down there, cast the vote, and we're done. So that's, when you have a special session, it really has to be agreed upon ahead of time what you're going to talk about. The governor is the only one that can call a special session, and he won't call it unless there's some sort of global agreement. So almost always they're one day and you're out of there.
Okay, thank you. Do you have anything to add?
No, that's accurate.
And at this time, then, we would start taking questions and comments from the people gathered here in the room. Again, please step up to the podium and state your name, and we'll go from there.
Looks like we're done.
Kathy's going to step up. There we go.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ron.
I have a couple questions. On the special session, who does the negotiating? Is it like a special committee, and how comfortable are you with the people that'll be in the committee negotiating on our rural behalf?
Well, for sure it'll be the majority leader of the Senate, who's a rural Democrat, the majority of the House, who's a rural Republican, and the governor, and then probably both minority leaders. That's typically, when they're talking about the tax bill, they'll probably bring in the two tax chairs, Skoye, who is a Democrat in rural, and Greg Davis, who's a Republican in rural. So on the tax bill, if that moves forward, I actually feel pretty comfortable. I have a very good working relationship with Senator Skoye. We talk about all the issues. There are times that he and I and Senator Kuhn, another Democrat that's rural, we're the three voting to pass it when you have two Metro ones that are voting against it. So I'm comfortable there. Some of the other issues maybe Ron can address.
Yeah, so at least in the House side, so we have an exec committee. In fact, I just got off the phone with Speaker Dowd a couple minutes before I got here. And we worked through this, all the things that are being proposed by every side. I mean, ultimately, you're going to see the Speaker, you're going to see the majority leader of the Senate, and the governor talking. But they're representing us. We voted them in. I can tell you on the House side, Speaker Dowd's not going to get any agreement that's not going to pass the caucus. We've got 73 members, and we ultimately need to get those votes. So he's very much in tune with what we're asking. We as the exec board are talking to members, and you know, when you look at the special session, I can tell you the light rail won't fly, and that's Senate, and that's Republicans and Democrats. On the night of when we were passing the transportation bill, I know it looks like it was harried and all that, but if you ever come down there, it's very much organized chaos. We're talking to each other. I had many Democrats come to me and say, Ron, if you leave the light rail out, we'll vote for this because I need other projects. I don't need that to take up my road and bridges money. So, I mean, it's a bipartisan opposition to a very expensive thing.
If I can add to Ron's comments there too, I'm texting Ron with just 15 minutes left and say, what is the House doing on this bonding bill? You know, and the Senate has this new amendment. Did you guys agree with this? And And he's telling me no, so it was, there was some real chaos there. But, and the reason why the bonding bill didn't make it through in the Senate, it made it through in the House, came over, and we all met, we talked about it, and there was going to be more than enough votes on the Senate side to pass it. And then at the last second, an amendment came on for light rail, and it was a difficult amendment to read. I was saying, is this the light rail? Did the House really agree with this? And so it brought real confusion, and part of the reason it brought real confusion is not once was light rail discussed in transportation this year in the Senate, which is controlled by the Democrats. Not one time did we have a hearing on light rail, and so to have a light rail amendment in the last 15 minutes of session when we've never even vetted it was very, very difficult. And I'm a little hesitant to put blame on the Democrats here. It's as much maybe the process that you're trying to get things done at the end and you're pushing back and forth and you're hoping the other side really agrees with you and you're assuming they do and maybe they don't. I'd rather say it was more that at the end, because in the end we've got to figure out how to work together. So I'm going to take the high road and say I hope it was that. But light rail is not going to happen for a bonding bill to go forward.
Will we see that property tax from the school referendum come through in the special?
As long as we get a tax bill. I mean,
it will be.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to take anything out of the tax bill. In fact, our position was, and I think Senator Gazelka, the governor's saying the tax bill didn't get signed because there was an or change to an and. We came back and said, fine, bring us back down there, we'll change that. I mean, these things happen all the time with revisers. It's just the nature of the beast. There's been many, many fixes on both sides. We've all done it. We were ready to come right back down and fix that day and then negotiate the bonding and transportation in a later session, which would have been better actually to draw that out. So yeah, the ag property tax credit is very much supported by everybody down there.
And for the group, what that actually covers is on ag property taxes, the part that is charged to a farmer or an ag landowner that goes to school referendums, 40% of that was going to be taken off of their taxes and paid by the state. So it wouldn't get passed on to our local property taxes, it wouldn't get to the residents, it wouldn't get to the small businesses. 40% of it was going to be taken off directly and paid by the state. So it was huge relief for our ag community when their property taxes have been going up and up and up. Was it the best way to do it? The real issue was we don't have adequate funding for our schools in rural Minnesota. And how do we fix that? And part of it was perhaps more referendums will pass as a result of the ag community getting some relief. But really we should fix that formula so that the rural schools get more funding per pupil.
Well, with that 40% being taken off of ag, where does that 40% then magically come from?
The general fund.
Yeah,
The
it comes
general
directly
fund.
from and what that means, Deb, is that everyone in the state, including all those in Metro, are helping to pay for that. And that's why I said it would be better if we just fixed the education formula, which is the case many of us are trying to make. And that wouldn't have been, because it is very unfair rural versus Metro. So I don't mind Metro helping us pay for that.
Yeah, let me, one thing that I'll add to that, one of the big disparities we have is down in the metro area, they have per square mile, they have a larger business community. So what happens is, in the metro area, they can pass these bonding referendums very quickly because the businesses, there's more business there and there's more property tax there, they can take that on. So for the residents, it's actually a less increase. It's about $1.25 here for every 50 cents down in the metro area that they pass. Because out in the rural areas, we're all agriculture. So what happens is we don't have the business base. As Ron knows, we have the acreage. We have the plantable acres. And so the only way we could solve this was we had to buy that down with general funds, which was the $40 million, so we could take that burden off the agriculture and treat them the same for an operating levy as well as a capital bonding levy. So now they're treated the same. But that difference we didn't want to shift to the homeowners because in the rural areas you have 3 people paying taxes. You got businesses, agriculture, and residents. Well, if we shifted the $40 million from agriculture, it had to go somewhere. So we shifted that through the general ed formula, which is, as Senator Gazelka stated, now is a statewide buy down.
Great, thank you. Robin?
Robin Hensel. Quote, "I'm well aware, as anyone who has seen Trevor Aronson's book, The Terror Factory, Inside the FBI's Manufactured War on Terrorism, that a large percentage of the persons, mostly Muslims, being convicted would not have ever committed any crime if not pushed to do so by FBI informants, and undercovers by some smaller percentage might have. Ironically and counterproductively, the United States military cannot have the global war on terror be seen as a war against Muslims, but the FBI and other homeland security agencies are doing precisely that, waging a war on Muslims, as it really is the only way they can participate and effectively justify their share of the burgeoning war budget. This has nothing to do with reducing the level of terrorism, as the United States and NATO initially supported the foreign jihadists fighting to topple the Syrian government. In other words, they never considered that some of the jihadists would return home and turn against their home countries. But that is the same when the United States ended up creating the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and now ISIS, and the same as when Israel created Hamas. The use of terrorist proxy forces, divide and conquer tactics, etc., is all about the effective manipulation in order for the United States to achieve its stated goal of full spectrum dominance over the world, unquote. Colleen Rowley, former FBI 2002 Person Times of the Year and whistleblower. Recently, the National Lawyers Guild of Minnesota stated this: "Our hearts are sad tonight," this is June 3rd, "because 3 young men who never actually hurt a soul were convicted of serious crimes they didn't commit. They are scapegoats for the excuse the United States needs to continue a permanent war state. Conspiracy to commit murder outside the United States is the crime that the United States should be charged with, not 3 young men who never even left Hennepin County." Pope Francis recently said, "The deeper question is why there are so many migrants now. This is in part the initial problems of the wars in the Middle East and in Africa. Coming back to the migrant issue, the worst form of welcome is to ghettoize them. On the contrary, it's necessary to integrate them. Today, I don't think there's a fear of Islam as much as such, but of ISIS and its war of conquest, which is partly drawn from Islam. It's true that the idea of conquest is inherent in the soul of Islam. However, it's also possible to interpret the objective of Matthew's gospel, where Jesus sends his disciples into all nations, in terms of the same idea of conquest. Christians and Muslims used to live together and must learn to do so again. We are all equal sons and daughters of God, and with our personal dignity, however, everyone must have the freedom to externalize his or her own faith. If a Muslim woman wishes to wear a veil, she must be able to do so. Similarly, if a Catholic wishes to wear a cross, people must be free to profess their faith at the heart of their own culture, not merely at its margins. What are either of you doing to change the hostile local environment whereby my local Somali friends are not able to shop locally in the grocery stores for fear of harassment? And I have one other question I'd like to pose to you. You state you're interested in taxes and saving this county residents' taxes. What are you personally doing to encourage Camp Ripley to get out of a state of non-compliance, apply for their 2 demolition permits that they have not done since January 1 of 2016, which puts them in violation of the very environmental laws that are implemented here locally to protect yours, mine, and all these people's water and air quality? So what are you doing personally to prod them outside of the lawsuit that had to be filed here by Morrison County Commissioners? What are you doing to prod them to get them to comply? Thank you.
Robin, I know you're very passionate about many of these issues. I have, I don't have anything directly that I'm doing. I mean, I'm certainly not creating a hostile environment. You don't see me out there pushing people away. I believe if you're a citizen and you have the rights of the Constitution, you should be able to exercise them. As far as being directly involved in Camp Ripley, that's not for my office to decide. I know Morrison County has had some issues there, but people like you, and if you want to continue to be passionate, that's awesome. That's helping the community. I have a whole slate of other things that I'm working on, and I'm one person, I can't do it all.
As far as the local level, between Camp Ripley and Morrison County, I do my best not to meddle if I think it's a local issue that has to be worked out. If either side asks me to get involved, then I will put my oar in the water, but even then, it's to help the two local partners figure it out. It's never an easy situation, but I want local control over lots of different things. And the more the state or the federal government gets involved, the less excited I get about it. But if I can help as a third party to have dialogue, then certainly I'm open to doing that. And some of your questions too are they're much bigger, much broader, much more complicated. As far as our military, it's a federal issue, but I think our budget, military budget right now is way too low. I think the word you used was burgeoning, and I think it's the opposite of that. Just talking to some of my relatives that are in the armed forces, they would disagree with that. And Islamic terrorism is not every Muslim. It's a very difficult, complex issue, but I absolutely support the FBI having informants, and when somebody is on a mission to do things in the name of Islam that many Muslims would disagree with, but when they're going to do it in the name of Islam, we should have people that are aware of that and apprehend them before they go down that path. And the whole issue of refugee resettlement is complicated. We talked about it last time I was here, I believe, and my hope is that moving forward with a new president, we will help settle refugees in or near the country that they're from, and we'll help pay for that. Most refugees would prefer that if they had the option, and so that's the direction that I would like to go. I'd like to see our federal government go. On an individual basis, I'm called to love the person in front of me, no matter whether I disagree. That is my command as a Christian, or Christ's command to me as a Christian is to love my neighbor no matter who they are, to love my enemy no matter who they are. But that doesn't mean that every public policy is mine to make. So, I know that's a long, roundabout question, but it was a more complicated question that you gave.
Well, my question was actually, what have you done to help neutralize the negative, hostile climate here locally? And I don't think either one of you answered that question at all.
I'll just leave it at that.
Me too.
Next question, please.
Good morning. I'm Kathy Lang with CHI St. Gabriel South. I actually have a question for each of you, and maybe one for Senator Gazelka, clarification. I know this session, the state Senate passed the prescription monitoring program bill. I'm not sure what it all entails. If you could explain
Could
that.
you repeat that again?
It's the prescription monitoring program. I believe the Senate passed that, and it has to do with requiring physicians to all log into the state monitoring program, which is a list of narcotics prescription. And that's Mr. Kresha, okay?
That's right. Yes.
And then also I want to know where we're at with the pharmacy lock boxes. We had a health fair, the hospital sponsored our community health fair on May 2nd, and we actually had the Morrison County Sheriff's Office and the Police Department in Little Falls take back unused prescriptions, and they took back like 4 large Rubbermaid totes. They took them back, and I believe it amounted to about 30 pounds of prescription drugs. So it's important to start in our opioid overuse. And just to give you a little background too, the hospital's been working on this for about 18 months, made some great progress. I was here last time when you were here talking a little about it. But just to give you an update, we're planning Congressman Nolan has invited us to do a congressional briefing in Washington, D.C. on July 12th. And we're going to talk about in Little Falls how we're leading our area in trying to combat the use of narcotics. In fact, the panel that we're putting together, our patient that we were taking to Washington with us just relapsed, and which is sad because he was a great example of how we were helping. And so the problem continues to be, of course, a major issue nationally. But anyway, so to clarify the prescription monitoring program and then where we're at with the pharmacy lockboxes.
So, first of all, Kathy, I have to thank your group because you helped educate me on this a lot. I had been hearing about it, but you specifically have helped me understand this even more. In the House and the Senate, this is a huge thing. We're talking about this a lot. And many of you are probably familiar with the opioid epidemic that we have. But the first thing that we did, and Representative Dave Baker out of Wilmer carried it, which actually carried it very emotionally and passionately, because he had a son that died of an overdose. So, but what the software, what the prescription opioid system allows you to do is doctors can now go into the database and they can look up to see a patient's opioid use. Because what we're finding is, from my very cursory knowledge, is when a patient comes in, they're not always going to disclose exactly what they're doing, and because a lot of times they're struggling with an addiction. The doctor can now go into the system and look up without the patient knowing right away what use they have. Look up their history. So if you come in and you say, well, I really aren't using a lot of this, they can look that history up to find out if you do have an addiction problem or what's going on with the history. So that's a step that will allow doctors to get to know their patients' opioid usage a little bit better. The lockbox we're still working on, and we're working on with the law enforcement agencies. The challenge with the lockbox is the cost. Who's going to bear the cost of having these lockboxes in all these communities, and which law enforcement picks it up? We still want to figure it out. We just haven't exactly figured out who's going to pay for it and who's going to be responsible. So we're working with law enforcement agencies on that. And for everybody, their information here, the idea is that there would be a lockbox in a community where somebody that has unused opioids can drop those in and they're dispensed of safely. Too often we have these, this goes back to even when I was growing up, I'm sure, whose parents didn't set the pills aside saying, well, you know what, when you have the tummy ache later, we'll have those pills. Well, the tummy aches has now become Vicodin and much stronger drugs that unfortunately older people are giving out, or they're, in good, thinking they're doing it out of goodwill, but we're creating a huge epidemic. So that's what we know on those. We're still fighting on the lock boxes. We're trying to figure out basically how that'll work, who will be responsible, and the cost.
Okay, I do have funding for Locksbox for our community. So through our SIM grant, I did ask if we could pay for those. They're not really expensive. They're like $800 a box. But yeah, through grant funding, if that's a barrier, I think we need to discuss that.
And the barrier is not the local; it's a state level. It's making. I mean, we have the money here, but we have to make sure if we're going to everything we do is statewide.
Right.
So we just can't carve out. So we're trying. We'll figure it out. It's
Okay.
just it's coming slow as everything down there takes time.
Okay. All right.
But thank you for your efforts. I mean, you've been absolutely phenomenal.
Thank you.
So.
All right.
Kathy, you had given a statistic one time about the number of prescriptions written in this community.
Well, one pharmacy is giving us, the number. So we actually, when we first started this program, it was 45,000 doses every month in a Little Falls pharmacy. And we actually, since we started this program, reduced it by 20%. It's now down to 35,000. So we're making headway step by step. So, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Other questions, comments?
Roman Tucky, High Creek Township. One thing brought up earlier, the question that I guess I won't commend, but I wish these legislators would work on it, make it affordable for average person to run for office. $31,000 a year if you're a state legislator, the average ordinary person would starve to death unless they have some additional income. I think you should work on a certain amount of public finances for state legislators, and I also believe $31,000 for what a state legislature has to do, especially a state legislator is more, they run for office every 2 years. You can't accept anything where they expect it to go. They go to a deal in Swanville, they can't accept the meal. I think it's totally unfair for the general public not to be able to run for office on what it costs for a campaign and the amount of money you get. If you don't have a supplementary income, your state legislators, the state senators, whether I like it or not, if you're Republican or Democrat, it's almost a full-time job. And I'm giving you a compliment on that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Roman, we agree again.
But on the second part of my question, we ran into this a special session, and actually, our legislative session this year ended kind of like in a special session. And it's ended that way in the last couple of years. The last few days, the last few hours of the session, everything's negotiated in the back room, smoke-filled room, like the old timers used to say. There's a handful of people that are negotiating the tax bill, the bonding bill. Our legislators out in the rural district or whatever don't really have a final say or a final vote. Like this year in the House, it wasn't even allowed a debate. Mics were shut off, so there couldn't be a debate. That's what the news report shut off, so people couldn't even bring up an issue or add amendment in the last few hours. And anytime you take a tax bill of 560 pages, I think it was, and send it over to the Senate, coming out of the House, and I'm like, you know, whatever comes out of the House or the Senate, there's no way possible our legislators know what's in that bill or what's going on in that bill. There should be a process that's in place that at least if bills, you adjourn on September 30th or April, May 1st, that bill should have to be in front of each house 24 hours prior so people can know what's going on. At least you have a chance to form a compromise. Under this bill, underneath the transportation bill went down, or in the tax bill, the transportation bill was the big bill, went down. Sure, there was an amendment to it. And it was and I don't know who the eight were that put the amendment on it. I suspect it was Republicans and Democrats that were here about it, on that bill. That bill went down, and there was no time to get back to conference. I think that backroom stuff, last minute stuff, can be eliminated with a simple procedure of ending your session a day early, and 24 hours later you get to vote on it in time to work it out in conference committee. And the last thing, we hear about rural Minnesota, metro, rural, that our tax dollars are getting spent in the metropolitan area. One of the issues I've looked at over the years I've been down there, in the last few years, 63% of all tax revenue comes out of the 5-county metro area. And the way it's distributed out in the last session, and I don't know how this session came out, 53% went for metro and 47, funding kind of stayed in the rural area. I think it's going to take more cooperation with the metro areas and somehow to do it. And that's what I wish you'd work with is get that in and get them bills passed so you as legislators know what the hell's going on. You don't have to sneak mistake in the bill. And I think you should work on, I'm requesting you that you at least put that up. Bills are done in the House at 7 and have 24 hours to look at them. Thank you.
Say, Roman, I just want to say I appreciate your comments. You've been around the block a long time as well, so you kind of know some of the things that go on down there. And I've done 8 sessions, and every single one of them, it comes down to the last day. And I don't know if it's human nature that people just won't compromise until the very end, but I think it would be wise to figure out a way to, even a week ahead of time, or that you have your certain major bills have a certain deadline. So I'm not sure how to get there, but I'm certainly totally agree with where you're at on that. And there is a constitutional amendment that's going to be on the ballot this year that basically says should legislators determine their own salary, because that's what it is now. And if that passes, it will go into a bipartisan commission that's going to determine our wages, which probably will mean a pay raise, frankly. But and I support that on a couple levels. One of them is, what if you had a corrupt body that continually gave themselves raises, which is what happens in some units of government around the country. They over-abuse the system. But in Minnesota, I do believe legislators, the 31,000 for what they have to do, balance over a $40 billion budget is perhaps a little bit small. And so, but I do appreciate your thoughtful comments, because we got to figure out how to do good government. And metro and rural is still Minnesota. We're all Minnesota, and so how do we work together? And this year, probably more than any other year, I have relationships with Democrats in the Senate that have given me great favor, just learning how to figure out what is good for Minnesota and how do we do it together, and what is worth giving up and what is worth fighting for and never giving up. But so I do greatly appreciate your comments.
And I know, in the last couple of years, it has gotten bad on the House side, you know, on the final bill. The last few years, it's worse than normal on the House side. And you know, because the Senate kind of have them all aroused and on the original bill. But I just wanted to express my comments and trying to get you to clean it up a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate all that. The process is ugly, I will tell you that. And no matter what we do, we can try to change it, which is fine. I actually support if we had a 24-hour waiting period. The problem that we have down there is leverage. And every side knows this. If you want to get what you want in your bill, you hold off until the very last second when you have the most leverage. It's nice to be able to say that it works like a business or like we do in our homes, where we talk things out, but we have 134 House members that are all pushing for their projects. We've got a Senate that has a 4-year cycle versus a 2-year cycle, so depending on where they're in the cycle, they can leverage things differently. So my point to this is, whatever we do to change the process, people are going to figure out ways to build leverage. And the best thing that I can tell you, what I've learned in the last 4 years, is you support good legislators who can go down there, who can work with both sides, who can figure out the process and work through it. Because you can use the process for yourselves or you can use it against yourselves. I've been very fortunate to learn how to use the process to get things that I think are bipartisan and good for the state. I don't always win, but I also know when things are coming up, and you just have to be smart. I mean, it's a very complicated process. To your point, Roman, yeah, a lot of stuff happens in the last hours. In the first year when we were negotiating the education bill, the governor knew this, and they kept coming at the very, very last moment. I'm not saying they're right or wrong, they were using the process. Because they knew if I come right before your deadline and give you an offer, you have less time to get this to the House floor and to get all 34 members, so you're more apt to take their position. It's just what happens down there, and it's unfortunate, but we're dealing with some pretty huge resources and a lot of bills, and sometimes you need to use that leverage to fight for something that's very, very important in your district. It's what we do.
Thank you. Other questions, comments?
Peter Larson. First of all, I would like to thank both of you for taking on this thankless job that you do have. However, I concur with Roman on many things. You people have got to find a way to expedite this process, not to wait till that last hour, and I don't care what you think about leverage. Use your leverage ahead of time. Get on with the program. You know, I happened to watch part of the House session, and I went to bed angry that night. And it was absolutely disgusting the way you people are trying to conduct business. And that's what you're doing. You're conducting business for all of us in the state of Minnesota. Your folks, your more rural area. So please, find a way. There's got to be a way where you can get this stuff resolved, so you aren't down to that last hour sending stuff over for somebody to say, okay on, and they don't even have a chance to look at it. That is not the way that government should be run. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Larson.
I appreciate that. One thing I'll add, and remember, we were down there for 10 weeks. Everything that was in those final bills went through committee. We talked about them at one point or another. I mean, it's not like, please don't, I'm not saying it's not a messy process. Don't get me wrong. But when you're on the inside and you see what's happening, we know what's coming up. I mean, these conversations are happening with both sides. You don't pass a bill 122 to 10 in the House without everybody knowing what's there. So I agree with what you're saying. There's a lot of messiness. I would invite you to come down with me and spend a couple days with me and walk through the back rooms and process in the committee to see how much we really know. Unfortunately, the media and the video loves to show one picture, but what you don't see when you're not looking at the camera is how much we're working with each other in the aisles, texting back and forth to say, this is what's coming, this is what's happening. We know a lot more of what's going on than the camera often says we do.
Yeah, if I can ask or add one thing to that too, is before a bill is actually passed off the Senate or the House floor, both sides take a break, they recess, and they review every bill that's coming. So none of those are a surprise. The surprise is when an amendment comes that nobody had talked about, and then that's where the confusion comes. Like the bonding bill had the amendment for light rail on the Senate side, because we didn't have much time at the end and we weren't sure was this part of the agreement or not part of the agreement. Those are the ones that we don't discuss that sometimes bring confusion.
That should be cut off.
Next question or comment, please.
Jim Gerwing from Pierce. You mentioned tax relief for a number of different areas, but one that you didn't mention was smoking, cigarette and that, and it seems like that's a squarely place for tax relief, simply because the cost of smoking and tobacco use to society is tremendous. And all kinds of evidence says that raising taxes reduces smoking, especially amongst young people. How does something like that get stuck in there, and do you support that kind of agreement, and why couldn't it get taken out?
Yeah, that was on the tax conference committee. It was House language. Representative Davids really wanted it. It did not decrease the tobacco tax. It just didn't allow an automatic continual increase in the tax. So the tax remained the same versus the law that had been prior was automatic increases. And so in addition, they changed the tax on vaping. They basically taxed the small producer at the expense of the big producer. In other words, the R.J. Reynolds of the world were the one that benefited, and your local vaping shop downtown is the one that got penalized. And I did not support that. I prefer supporting the little guy over the big guy personally. But that was a provision that was in there in the overall tax bill, and I definitely support the overall tax bill. But that's how it got there.
One thing I'll just add on that quickly in the House side, and it was I didn't necessarily support it, but I know why it got in there, and the main reason there was bipartisan support from our border communities. Representative Lean, who's a Democrat, was supporting this out of Moorhead, as well as when you get down into Winona, all these, because what's happening is, unfortunately, people are using tobacco. Whether you approve or don't approve of it, people have a right to do it. But what's happening in the border communities are people are going across the border, not just to buy their tobacco products, but they're buying other products. So they're taking business out of their communities. So the border communities were trying to offset that so they can keep their tax dollars in. However you feel about the tobacco, that's how it got there.
Actually, we didn't have a lot of discussion on that in the final tax committee, but I remember in tax committee that discussion we had it at length. And so now, because Minnesota's tobacco tax is so much higher than our neighboring states, those local border businesses were losing tons of business to Wisconsin, North Dakota, Iowa, and so that has to be then why it came forward that way.
Next question or comment?
Kevin Miller, Morrison County Commissioner. And first of all, and most importantly, I'd like to thank both of you, because whenever I, as a county commissioner, call you regarding issues, you get right back to me, you find answers, and that's so important in connecting to local government, and that's been such a priority, so thank you. The other thing, I just wanted to kind of put my 2 cents worth in, I've been a chemical dependency counselor, licensed alcohol and drug counselor for well over 31 years now, and having worked with the county for 14 years, and then at Northern Pines for 6, and then at Crow Wing County Detox as a nursing counselor for 6 years until it closed in 2012, we saw a lot of clients with opiate dependency issues. And you know, Ron, I heard you speak to the issue of people getting it from their parents or adults, that prescriptions that are left there. Basically, I don't think that's nearly what the problem is it's being prescribed. And you know, opiate use over the long haul cannot do anything but create an increase of tolerance and a need for more and more. And if you look at the studies from the last year, there were well over 300 deaths in Minnesota related to opiates. Of those, by far, there were more related to prescription opiates than heroin. So looking at those 2 things, and they are one and the same, and we failed to make that comparison. They all come from the same plant, they are addictive opioids, and that becomes the issue. So I think the problem is much more, it's prescribed, people get addicted to it, and then they seek something once that prescription is cut back on or discontinued, then they seek other things to fulfill that, which then ultimately becomes illegal drugs, okay? I spoke in December at the Beyond Poverty, two talks in Staples regarding opiate abuse and addiction. I then spoke on a panel at the college in Staples about 2 months ago on methamphetamines, which are really starting to create, there's a real resurgence to them. So, I mean, it is a big problem. We just need to really be aware of it. And it's kind of interesting in going to that, or in speaking on opiates, Dr. Holfman, the medical director of Staples Hospital, called me regarding some misperceptions that I may have given. And I talked about our system that perpetrates it. And just a quick header here, if you watch TV now, there is a prescription now that you can get for opioid-induced constipation, which is, I mean, it's insane from my perspective as a counselor, because now we're creating medications that deal with the symptoms of an addictive substance instead of dealing with the issue of the addictive substance. So kind of interesting. So, you know, I really believe that that's such a priority. The other one thing I want to talk about is our mental health system and the jails that have to continue to pick up and deal with mental health clients because the state has dropped the ball very clearly since a lot of the state hospitals have been closed. Accessing services at Detox, we really helped a lot of people, holding them pending commitment processes when they were mentally ill. Crow Wing County Detox was one of the few at that time that really would take those clientele in, because most other detoxes just deal with alcohol-related stuff, and now that's not there. So that holding ability, most of them running up in general hospitals, on general medical floors, which creates major issues when you have acting out behavior of people coming to withdrawal. So that's such a big issue. I know the mental health task force has been proposed by the governor. My concern about that is that those dollars won't be transferred down to local taxpayers again, and the state system doesn't take care of that. So thank you.
Kevin, I want to make sure we stay focused on the mental health issue. I met with a group of 20 or 25 from all kinds of angles of that issue out in Wadena. And I just asked them if you guys could all agree on something, because it was the sheriff's department and the hospital and the 16-bed unit providers and all the different, I said, if you guys could all agree, I'm absolutely going to support what you guys put forward. And so if you can connect to that group too, I would greatly appreciate it.
Okay, and a lot of them were on that panel in Staples, so, okay. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Next question or comments? The Minnesota Chamber of Commerce is the lobbying arm for the chambers throughout the state of Minnesota. So as your local chamber, we do not have that lobbying. We can certainly talk to our elected officials one-to-one. But we are starting the grassroots process for the 2017 session already now in June. So if you have any issues that you would like to be brought forward as the Minnesota Chamber puts together their legislative platform, please let me know by June 23rd. And that's the time when I will be going to a meeting. And it truly is a good process because I can bring forward the issues that our local business community is facing. And a couple of them that did get through the session this year was the lawsuits that were targeting small businesses for alleged violations for the Americans with Disabilities Act. That was huge in some other communities where someone was literally going door to door and identifying tripping hazards or areas that businesses were not handicapped accessible, and it was almost an extortion type of situation. The other one that was significant legislation for our local business community was the reform and payroll tax relief that was passed through. Now that will go into effect in 2016, where our businesses will be able to get a one-time tax credit, and they did put a threshold on how much money can be in that pot before more credits are given back to our businesses. So we certainly appreciate the work that our elected officials did to work with us on those issues. And of course, there were some that didn't get through, but there's always next year.
And Deb, if the tax bill eventually does sign, a business owner that owns a building on Main Street pays local property taxes, but then pays another 33% that goes straight to the state. And in that tax bill that I hope still passes, the first 100,000 of building value would be exempt from the tax that goes to the state. And so many of our small businesses in rural Minnesota would have a full exemption of the tax that goes to the state. So I'm hoping we still get that for our Main Street businesses.
I do too, because I own one of those buildings.
One thing I just, thank you for that. One thing Deb mentioned, and this I find out across the board, when you go down and do legislative work, you end up trying to work through policy and budgets and trying to figure out how you can put together the right pieces. But unfortunately, a lot of what we end up doing comes from a minority of people's behavior. And I'm going to say, like for example, I was the second author on the bill that dealt with handicap lawsuits. And what was happening here was a rogue lawyer was going through the state. He was stopping in a business, and he would see violations, and he'd right away take them into lawsuits. We changed the law and said, no, what you need to do is you need to inform that business owner and give them the opportunity to become compliant, rather than just taking this into a lawsuit and make a ton of money. So what we have is, I look out in the room, and I know most of you, I mean, we're not the ones that are trying to take advantage of situations. We're trying to raise our families. We're trying to do the right thing. But we've got these minority of people that are doing these things that cause us to then legislate. And the problem is, I'll tell you, 9 out of 10 solutions that we do down at the legislature aren't very good, because we have to apply them to the whole state, and you end up coming in with a sledgehammer when really all you need to do was a screwdriver. So, I mean, I bring that up because here was a situation that I thought, my goodness, I have to legislate a person who's extorting our businesses who are just trying to do the right thing, and oh, by the way, maybe they didn't have the step at the exact right height, or they didn't have this compliance, and rather than giving them the opportunity to do the right thing, somebody decided that they could just make a lot of money off there. That's not how you treat people. And unfortunately, it gets to our level, and then we have to legislate it. So, and I see this with time and time and time again. I mean, I'm dealing with a foster care system, the child protection system, where somebody just doesn't love their kid. I mean, I can't imagine that somebody is willing to do the things they do to these children. And then and Kevin, you mentioned the mental health. We're dealing with families that are passing on the most basic functions that they could do that the state can never do for them. The state can never do for them what some of these parents could just simply be doing. You look at preschool education. If you read to your kid every night, you would be far and away ahead what most of these kids are getting. So, it's not a lecture for the people in this group. I'm just telling you where we end up dealing with legislation and where things come from in some of the weaknesses.
If there are no other questions, we'll wrap up for today. We want to thank Chris from Public Access Television for recording us for rebroadcast, to the City of Little Falls for allowing us to use the council chambers, and again to Representative Kresha and Senator Gazelka for spending time with us today. And you are still our elected officials, at least till the end of the year. All right, great. And thank you for being with us today, and remember, they cannot help you unless you let them know what your issues are. So please continue to have dialogues with our gentlemen here. Great, thank you.